Tommy hesitated at the foot of the old oak tree, its gnarled branches clawing at the overcast sky like skeletal fingers. The treehouse above loomed in the dimming light, a place once filled with laughter and whispered secrets. But tonight, it felt wrong, empty, or maybe not empty at all. It had been 2 weeks since Ben's funeral, 2 weeks since Tommy's world had cracked apart. The memory of his best friend, his only real friend, was still fresh. Ben had fallen into the lake. A stupid accident, they said, but Tommy knew better. He had been there. He had seen Ben's face beneath the water, eyes wide, mouth moving as if speaking words Tommy couldn't hear. And then, nothing. The night wind whispered through the brittle leaves, carrying a sound that made Tommy's stomach clench. A whisper, faint but distinct, just behind him. His breath hitched. He turned sharply, but the yard stretched behind him, empty in the deepening dusk. The only sound was the creak of the old tree. He shook his head. Just the wind. He needed to stop jumping at shadows. With a deep breath, Tommy grabbed the rope ladder and climbed. The wood beneath his fingers felt cold, damp, as if the treehouse had been abandoned for years instead of days. The air smelled stale, tinged with something rotten. He stepped inside. The place was exactly as they had left it. Scattered comic books, a half-empty bag of chips, Ben's flashlight lying beside his worn sleeping bag. It looked normal. And yet, something in the air prickled against Tommy's skin. Then he heard it again, the whisper. This time, he didn't turn around. His pulse pounded as he listened. The words were too soft to understand, but the voice it was familiar. Ben? His own voice barely escaped his throat. A soft creak behind him. Tommy spun, heart slamming against his ribs. Nothing, just the darkened corners of the treehouse. But something was different. The flashlight. It had moved. It was now pointing at the trap door. Tommy swallowed hard. Number? He didn't want to play this game. Not with whatever this was. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices hissing like wind through broken glass. The trapdoor creaked, just slightly, as if something beneath it had nudged it open. A draft hit his face, carrying with it the sickly scent of damp earth and decay. Then, a hand cold, wet brushed against his ankle. Tommy yelped, stumbling back. The whispering stopped abruptly. Silence, thick and suffocating, filled the treehouse. His breathing came in sharp gasps. He had imagined it. Had to. There was no hand, no whispering, just his own messed up head playing tricks on him. Then the flashlight flickered. It wasn't its usual steady beam. It blinked. A pattern, a message, a name spelled out in jagged Morse code. Help me. Tommy's stomach turned to ice. The whispers returned, more insistent, forming words he could finally understand. He's still there. Tommy's body locked up. The lake. Was that what they meant? Something thumped below him. The trapdoor shuddered. He backed against the wall, his skin crawling as the wood beneath him groaned. A deep, ragged breath came from beneath the floor. Tommy. It was Ben's voice. A sob broke from Tommy's throat. Ben? His fingers dug into the wall. Is it really you? A pause burst open. The thing that crawled out was not Ben. Not anymore. Its skin was bloated, slick with lake water. Its eyes, sunken and black, locked onto Tommy's with a hunger that turned his blood to ice. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. It lunged. Tommy hit the floor hard. Ben's hands clammy and cold, clawed at his arms. The scent of rotting leaves and damp wood filled his nose. Come back, the thing rasped. I'm so cold. Tommy kicked wildly, scrambling back. His hand found the flashlight. He swung it, hard, smashing it into the thing's head. It shrieked, a sound that twisted and warped in the night air. Then it was gone, vanished, leaving nothing but the open trapdoor yawning beneath him. Tommy bolted. He half fell down the rope ladder, hitting the ground hard. Pain jolted through his legs, but he didn't stop. He ran. Ran until the whispering faded, until the night swallowed the echoes of the thing that had once been his best friend. He never went back to the treehouse, but sometimes on the wind, he still heard the whispering, and the words chilled him to the bone. I'm still here. The treehouse had been there for as long as anyone could remember, perched high in the skeletal arms of an ancient oak. It loomed over the backyard like a forgotten relic of childhood adventures. When the Hewitts moved in, their son Jake was immediately drawn to it. The previous owner had warned them not to let him play there. Something's not right about that place, he'd muttered, shaking his head. But warnings had a way of making things more enticing. By the second week, Jake was climbing the rickety wooden ladder, vanishing into the dark entrance above. At first, it was just a harmless old clubhouse, dusty and filled with the scent of rotting wood. But then Jake started talking about the boy. He says his name is Eli. Jake told his mother one night over dinner. He used to live here. He still does, kind of. His mother exchanged a glance with her husband. Honey, there's no one up there. It's just an old treehouse. Jake shrugged and kept eating. But every day after school, he climbed up into that treehouse, and every night he talked about Eli. Then the noises started. Scratching at the window, faint rhythmic thumping from above, the sound of something moving across the attic floor when no one was up there. One night, as the wind howled outside, Jake woke them with a scream. They found him sitting upright in bed, his eyes wide with terror. Eli's mad, he whispered. He says this is his house. He says I have to leave. The next day, his father nailed the treehouse shut. But Jake still heard Eli. The whispers came through the vents, through the walls, through the darkness that filled his room at night. Eli didn't like to be ignored. Then, one evening, they found the nails pried loose. The treehouse door hung open, swaying slightly, though there was no wind. Jake was gone. They searched the house, the yard, the neighborhood. Hours passed. The police came. Flashlights swept across the property. And then his mother saw something, just a flicker of movement, high in the treehouse. She called out, but there was no answer. She climbed the ladder, her heart hammering. The wood creaked beneath her weight, and the air grew colder the higher she went. As she reached the top, she hesitated, peering into the dark opening. Then she saw him. Jake stood in the center of the treehouse, unmoving. His back was to her, his head tilted at an odd angle. "Baby?" she whispered, reaching for him. He turned slowly, and she saw his face. His eyes were empty, his skin gray, and behind him, just barely visible in the dim light, another figure stood there, pale, grinning. The door slammed shut. Jake was never seen again. The Hewitts tried to move on, but the weight of the house pressed down on them like a curse. The whispers did not stop. At night, they heard faint giggles from the attic, tiny footsteps scurrying across the ceiling. The treehouse, despite being boarded up again and again, always seemed to open itself. No matter how hard they tried, they could not keep it shut. Desperate, Jake's parents sought out the previous owner. He was reluctant at first, but finally agreed to talk. It happened before, he admitted, his voice shaking. That treehouse, it's wrong. My son Thomas, he was the first. He talked about Eli, too. Then one day he was gone. Just gone. The Hewitts left the house soon after, abandoning it like all the others before them. But the whispers continued. The treehouse remained. And sometimes, in the dead of night, a shadowy figure could be seen standing at the tiny window, watching, waiting for the next child to come play. Years passed, and the house remained empty. Children in the neighborhood dared one another to climb the tree, to knock on the boarded-up door of the treehouse. Most never got past the first rung of the ladder before a sudden chill sent them running. One boy, Matthew, was braver than the rest. One Halloween night, fueled by candy and bravado, he climbed all the way to the top. He knocked. The door creaked open. Inside, dust swirled in the moonlight. The old wooden floor groaned beneath his sneakers. "Hello?" he called. His voice sounded too loud, swallowed by the pressing silence. Then he heard it, a whisper, a giggle. The door slammed behind him. His friends, waiting below, screamed as the treehouse shuddered violently. The windows darkened as if something inside had swallowed the light. And then, silence. Matthew was never seen again. The town tried to destroy the treehouse. A demolition crew arrived one morning, only to find their equipment wouldn't start. Axes and saws rusted overnight. The workers reported whispers in their ears, hands that gripped their tools and turned them away. Eventually, they gave up. The treehouse remained. To this day, children speak in hushed voices about the treehouse at the edge of town. No one dares go near it after sunset. Some say, if you listen closely on a still night, you can hear the laughter of children echoing from high in the branches, where no one should be. The treehouse was their kingdom, built high among the gnarled branches of the old oak. It was a place of whispered secrets, late-night dares, and endless summer adventures. Ben, Tommy, and Ellie had spent every evening there since school let out, watching the sun set beyond the forest and daring each other to tell the scariest stories they could muster. But then one night, they noticed something strange. Ellie was the first to see it. Just past the clearing, beyond the tangle of brambles that bordered the woods, stood a figure, a tall, dark silhouette, motionless against the tree line. At first, she thought it was a trick of the dimming light, but when she nudged Ben and Tommy, their faces went pale. "It's just standing there," Tommy whispered. Ben squinted. "Maybe it's a tree trunk or a shadow?" "Then why does it look like a person?" Ellie countered, gripping the wooden ledge of the treehouse. They watched, breath held, but the figure didn't move. It just stood, utterly still like a statue. Eventually, they convinced themselves it was nothing and went back to their stories. But as they packed up to leave, Ellie glanced back and the figure was gone. The next night, it happened again. Same spot, same eerie stillness. This time, there were two figures. "Okay, no way that's a coincidence," Tommy muttered. "Someone's messing with us." Ben, ever the bravest, climbed down. "I'm checking it out." "Ben, don't," Ellie hissed. But Ben had already hit the ground. He approached the edge of the clearing, flashlight in hand. His beam cut through the shadows, revealing nothing but trees and brush. "See? Nothing's here," he called. But as he turned to head back, something rustled behind him. He spun around, but the light revealed nothing, just empty woods. That night, Ben swore he heard whispers outside his window. By the fourth night, the figures had multiplied. 5, maybe 6, all standing just at the edge of the clearing. They never moved, never spoke. They just watched. "We need to tell someone," Ellie said, voice shaking. "This is getting worse." "Tell them what? That shadow people are watching us?" Ben scoffed. "They'll think we're crazy." "So what do we do?" Tommy asked. "We get proof," Ben said. "We bring a camera." That night, they set up an old camcorder, the kind Ben's dad used for family trips. They pointed it toward the clearing and hit record before settling in to watch. The figures came, as expected, but when they reviewed the footage later, the screen showed nothing, just an empty clearing. "No way," Ellie murmured. "We saw them." "They're real," Tommy insisted. "They have to be." But something else was wrong. At the very end of the recording, as they were packing up to leave, the camera caught something they hadn't noticed before. A faint reflection in the wooden walls of the treehouse, something standing directly behind them, something inside with them. Ellie screamed and knocked over the camera. They never ran home faster in their lives. But as they scrambled down the ladder, Ben risked one final glance back at the treehouse. And there, silhouetted in the dim glow of their lantern, was a single shadowy figure standing inside, staring down at them. Ben's breath came in short gasps as he slammed the wooden hatch shut, his hands trembling. Tommy and Ellie huddled against the far wall, eyes wide with terror. The sound of heavy footfalls echoed up the ladder, slow and deliberate, as if savoring their fear. "We have to get out of here," Ellie whispered, barely able to keep her voice steady. Tommy shook his head. "They're everywhere. We saw them. There's no way down." A deafening knock against the floor made all three of them jump, then another. The wood creaked under an unseen weight. A long, rasping breath seeped through the cracks. Ben fumbled for the camera, flipping it open with shaking fingers. The last frame was still visible, a blurry, shifting figure at the edge of the screen, its featureless face somehow staring directly at the lens. Then, as if sensing its own capture, the screen flickered and died. The camera was no longer responding. Something scraped along the outside of the treehouse, circling them. Ellie covered her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. Tommy gritted his teeth and grabbed a rusted hammer from the tool chest in the corner. We can't just sit here. If they get in... A splintering crack cut him off. The boards near the hatch began to buckle. Fingers long, blackened, impossibly thin slid between the gaps, curling like talons. Ellie screamed. Ben lunged forward, stomping at the wood with all his strength, but it was too late. The hatch burst open, splinters flying in every direction as the first figure pulled itself inside. It was taller than any of them, its body a shifting void, darker than the night itself. The air turned cold, and the scent of decay filled the small space. It moved with jerky, unnatural motions, its head twitching toward them as if registering their presence for the first time. Ben grabbed the lantern and hurled it. Glass shattered, flames licking at the creature's outstretched arms. It let out a distorted, inhuman screech, recoiling against the wall. "Now!" Ben yelled, shoving Ellie toward the ladder. One by one, they scrambled down, the fire spreading behind them. More figures loomed in the darkness, their featureless heads tilting in unison. The moment their feet hit the ground, they ran. Branches lashed at their faces, roots threatened to trip them, but they didn't stop. The shrieks behind them grew louder, closer. The creatures weren't just watching anymore. The treehouse burst into flames, an unnatural blue glow illuminating the clearing. The figures recoiled from the light, their bodies twisting, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. Ben, Tommy, and Ellie reached the road, gasping for breath. When they dared to look back, the fire had consumed the treehouse entirely. The figures were gone. For the first time in days, the woods were silent. "We can't ever come back," Ellie whispered. No one argued. They never spoke of that summer again, but sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled through the trees, they swore they could still see shadowy figures standing at the edge of the woods, waiting. The old treehouse sat deep in the woods, a forgotten relic of childhood adventure. Its wooden planks had aged to a grayish hue, and the rope ladder swayed ominously in the night wind. Noah, Eli, and Maddie had always loved this place. It was their secret hideaway, a place where stories were told under flashlight beams, and ghost stories seemed just thrilling enough to still be fun. But tonight, the darkness outside felt heavier. The air was thick with an unfamiliar silence, the kind that made the usual rustling leaves sound like whispers too close to the ear. "Did you guys hear that?" Maddie asked, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Eli rolled his eyes. "You're just trying to scare yourself." Noah, the oldest, grinned and shone his flashlight toward the window. "Nothing but trees. You're fine." The three of them huddled together in their sleeping bags, the wooden floor beneath them creaking every so often as the wind pushed against the treehouse walls. Eventually, their nervous chatter died down, and one by one they drifted into sleep. Sometime past midnight, Noah stirred. A sharp chill crept over his body, but it wasn't the wind. His toes tingled, and he flexed them under the blanket. That's when he felt it. Cold fingers, wrapping around his feet. His eyes shot open. He tried to jerk his legs away, but the grip tightened. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he peered down. Nothing. His sleeping bag lay undisturbed, zipped all the way up. His feet were warm inside, untouched. And yet, the sensation still lingered to see pressure where something had grabbed him. He sat up, heart pounding, and looked around. Maddie and Eli lay still, their faces peaceful in the dim glow of the dying lantern. The treehouse door was shut, the windows latched. It had to be a dream. Noah exhaled, shaking his head, and lay back down. He forced his eyes shut, telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But just as sleep threatened to pull him under again, A whisper crawled through the treehouse. No. His eyes snapped open. The voice was thin, stretched, like someone speaking through cracked lips. It had come from below. He turned to Eli, nudging him hard. "Wake up," he hissed. Eli groaned, pushing his hand away. "What? Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Eli mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Before Noah could answer, a slow, rhythmic thump echoed from beneath the floorboards. Maddie bolted upright. What was that? Noah's heart pounded. "I don't know," he whispered. The thump came again, deliberate and heavy. "Is someone climbing up?" Maddie whispered. Noah reached for the flashlight, hand trembling. He flicked it on and aimed it at the floor. The treehouse had a trapdoor, a small wooden square leading to the rope ladder below. It was latched shut. But as they stared, the latch rattled. Someone or something was trying to get in. A sharp knock made all three of them jump. Then a voice, hoarse and wrong, called from below. "Let me in!" Maddie covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Eli scrambled backward until his back hit the wall. Noah's breathing turned shallow. "Who's there?" he forced out. Silence. Then a scratching sound, slow and scraping, like nails dragging along the wood. Eli's voice was barely a whisper. "We should run." But as he spoke, the trapdoor latch lifted on its own. And then, the door swung open. The trapdoor swung open with a slow, deliberate creak, revealing only a gaping black void beneath them. The lantern's dim glow barely reached the opening, and the flashlight's beam trembled in Noah's shaking hands. For a long, suffocating moment, nothing emerged. Then, fingers, pale, too long, and jointed in a way that felt wrong. They gripped the edge of the floorboards, curling like a spider's legs. Maddie let out a strangled gasp. Eli scrambled backward, whispering a frantic, "No, no, no." Noah couldn't move. His breath came in shallow bursts, the air in the treehouse suddenly thick and stale. The fingers tightened, pulling something up. A head. The face was all wrong-stretched skin, hollowed cheeks, and eyes like wet, empty holes. Its mouth opened too wide, lips cracked and torn, revealing black gums and teeth that looked splintered. Noah didn't think. He acted. He grabbed the lantern and hurled it toward the creature. Glass shattered. Oil splattered against the wood, catching fire in a sudden, angry burst. The flames flared between them and the thing, painting its gaunt face in flickering orange light. A sound tore from its throat, a shriek that made Noah's ears ring. The thing recoiled, retreating back through the trapdoor, disappearing into the dark. But the fire had spread. "The floor!" Maddie screamed, yanking at Noah's arm. The old wooden planks were catching fast, flames licking hungrily at the dry timber. Smoke billowed, thick and acrid, making their eyes water. "We have to jump," Eli coughed, pulling Maddie toward the window. The rope ladder was burning. The fire had caught its base, the flames creeping upward, devouring their only way down. Noah looked around, panic tightening his chest. "The branches! We can climb down!" Maddie was already pulling herself onto a thick, sturdy limb that stretched close to the treehouse. Eli followed, his breath ragged as he tried to maneuver his way across. Noah was about to follow when a whisper slithered through the smoke. "No, you can't leave." The voice came from inside the flames. He turned. Through the smoke and fire, the creature stood in the center of the burning treehouse, untouched by the heat, its hollow eyes locked onto him. It smiled, lips peeling back. "You brought me here." Noah's skin turned ice cold. The floor beneath him groaned. "No, now!" Maddie's voice snapped him out of his trance. He lunged for the branch, grabbing it just as the floor gave way, sending the burning remains of the treehouse crashing down into the forest below. For a moment, all he could hear was the roar of fire, the crackling of wood, and his own pounding heartbeat. Pencilets. The three of them clung to the tree, coughing, gasping, staring at the wreckage below. It was over, or so they thought. As they watched, the fire dimmed not because it had burned out, but because something darker was swallowing it. The shadows pooled unnaturally, smothering the embers, consuming the wreckage. And then, rising from the blackness, the thing, unscathed, still smiling, it raised one skeletal hand and waved, its hollow eyes fixed on them. Noah felt a terrible certainty settle into his bones. It wasn't trapped in the treehouse. It was never trapped at all. And now, it was free. It started with the storm, the kind of storm that shakes windows, sends branches clawing against rooftops, and fills the night with eerie howls. Milo had spent the night under his blankets, heart pounding every time the wind slammed against the house. He wasn't scared of storms, not really, but something about this one had felt wrong. The power had flickered once, twice, then gone out completely. The next morning, the sun rose, golden and calm, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Milo, Ben, and Ava met at the usual spot at the edge of the woods. Their bikes lay in the grass, tires still spinning from the ride over. Their parents always told them not to go too deep into the trees, but the treehouse was different. It was theirs. Built years ago by kids who had long since grown up and disappeared, it had become their summer hideout. The planks were warped from years of rain, the nails rusted, but it stood strong, tucked away among the leaves. It was a place where nothing bad could happen, or so they thought. The box. Milo was the first to notice it. A wooden box sat in the corner of the treehouse, coated in dust and leaves. The lid was slightly ajar, as if waiting for someone to open it. That wasn't here before, Ben muttered. Ava frowned. No way, we'd have seen it. Milo hesitated before reaching out. The wood was damp and rough under his fingertips. With a soft creak, he lifted the lid. Inside, a stack of papers. Notebooks, maybe? No letters. Old ones. The pages were yellowed. The ink faded. The edges curled from time. Ava picked up the first one and squinted at the handwriting. It was neat, careful, but the letters trembled slightly. The 12th of August, 1962. He's watching again. I hear him breathing under the floorboards. I don't know how much longer we can stay here. Ava looked up, a crease forming between her brows. Who's he? Ben snorted. Probably some dumb ghost story. Someone left these here to freak people out. Milo wasn't so sure. He reached for another. The 14th of August, 1962. It doesn't matter if we lock the door. He comes in anyway. We tried running once. He was waiting outside. A gust of wind rattled the treehouse. Ava flinched. Okay, not funny. No one did anything, Milo said, swallowing hard. Ben flipped to the next letter. The writing was messier now, the ink smudged in places, as if the person had been shaking. The 16th of August, 1962. Last night I woke up and he was standing in the corner. His face isn't right. His eyes don't move, but I know he sees me. Milo's stomach clenched. Something about the letters felt real. The air inside the treehouse seemed heavier now, as if the walls had crept closer. Ava shifted. Maybe we should go. One more, Ben said. His voice was quieter now. Milo took the last letter from the box. Unlike the others, this one was crumpled, the edges torn as if the writer had been gripping it too tightly. The ink was smeared, rushed. The 18th of August, 1962. If you're reading this, don't look back, he's already inside. The treehouse fell silent. No one turned around. No one moved. Then, a creak. Not from the wind. Not from outside. From inside the treehouse. Milo's breath caught in his throat. He felt that something was behind them. Ava inhaled sharply, her body rigid. Guys. No one responded. The air had changed. It was thicker, hotter, carrying the scent of damp wood. And something else. Something rotting. Ben's gaze flickered to the tiny window. His face went white. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Milo swallowed hard. His gut screamed at him not to look, but he did. And his heart stopped. Outside, at the base of the treehouse, something stood in the clearing. No standing, hanging, suspended just above the ground, its limbs limp, but wrong. The head tilted too far, as if the neck had snapped but never properly healed. The mouth stretched wide, wider than it should, and then it smiled. Not with its lips, with its teeth. Ben made a strangled sound. Oh God. Then it moved. Not climbed, not walked. It was just closer. The trapdoor, the one they hadn't touched, was open. A shadow passed over them. Milo barely had time to register the movement before Ava screamed. Run! Milo lunged for the ladder. His foot slipped. A hand-impaled, twisted hand shot out from the trapdoor. Fingers too long. Skin stretched tight over bones. Milo kicked. His foot connected, and the thing recoiled with an awful, wet sound. Ben was already halfway down, nearly tripping in his panic. Ava's sobs choked in her throat as she scrambled after them. The treehouse creaked, wood groaning under a weight that wasn't theirs. Milo hit the ground running. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop. None of them did. Branches whipped past their faces. Leaves crunched underfoot. The sound of their own breathing drowned out everything else. Until silence. They stopped at the edge of the woods, panting, heaving. Only then did Milo dare to look back. The treehouse was gone. Not collapsed, not broken. Gone, as if it had never been there. The wind rustled the trees. The woods stood still. Then, from the distance, a creak, a whisper, a breath, and the faintest sound of laughter.